"I told you to stay away from me," the cowboy whispered, but he still pulled her closer when the storm shook the cabin walls. Nathan's hand slammed against the cabin door as the wind screamed through the cracks. Savannah's fingers clutched his coat, trembling so hard he could feel it through the wool. The lantern flickered. Snow hissed against the windows, and when she pressed her face against his chest, the cowboy who hadn't touched a woman in 10 years stopped breathing for one dangerous second. What was she running from? And why did he look more afraid than she did? Stay close till the end. This story only gets deeper from here. The wind came hard off the Wind River Mountains that night. Not steady, not natural. It screamed down the slopes in violent bursts that rattled the cabin walls and sent dry snow hissing across the frozen yard like sand against stone. The lantern hanging outside Nathan Cole's barn swung so hard its chain groaned with every gust. Nathan stood near the stove, pulling on his gloves, listening. The horses were restless again. He could hear them shifting inside the barn through the storm. Hooves scraping wood, nervous snorts. Animals always knew before men did when weather turned ugly. He grabbed his heavy wool coat from the peg beside the door and shoved his hat low over his brow. The cabin was warm behind him. The smell of coffee still lingered near the stove from supper. Earlier that evening, a single plate sat unwashed beside the basin, one plate. That was how it had been for nearly 10 years now. Nathan opened the door, and the storm hit him full in the face. Cold air sliced straight through his beard and collar. Snow whipped across the porch, so thick he could barely see the fence line 20 feet away. He stepped down into drifts already halfway to his knees. The mountain had disappeared. Everything beyond the barn was white and moving. Nathan lowered his head and pushed toward the stable, one gloved hand gripping the lantern tight. The light bounced weakly through the snow. Inside the barn, the horses settled some once they heard his voice. "Easy now," he muttered. He checked the latch twice, added extra hay, ran a rough hand along the neck of the old bay mare nearest the stall door. The horse nudged his shoulder gently. Nathan paused there longer than he meant to. Sometimes the quiet inside the barn felt safer than the silence inside the cabin. Less memory in here, less ghost. Another gust slammed the outer wall, hard enough to shake loose dust from the rafters. Nathan turned toward the open crack near the stable doors. That was when he heard it. Not the wind, something else, faint, broken. A sound too weak to survive out there. Nathan stilled. The noise came again. Somewhere beyond the lower ridge near the pine line. Half buried beneath the storm. A cry. He swore under his breath and grabbed the lantern. Damn it. The mountain was death tonight. Anybody caught out there already belonged to the cold. Nathan shoved through the barn doors and disappeared into the white. The snow fought every step. Wind tore at his coat, ice stung his eyes raw. More than once his boots slipped beneath hidden rock and nearly sent him down the slope. Then the lantern light caught something dark against the snow. A body, half covered already. Nathan dropped to one knee fast enough to sink deep into the drift. A woman. Her face was turned sideways against the ice, dark curls frozen to her cheek. Snow clung thick along her shoulders and lashes. Her lips had gone pale blue. For one terrible second, Nathan saw another face there. Another winter. Another woman he could not save. His chest tightened so hard he could barely breathe. "No," he muttered roughly. "No, not again." He brushed snow away with both hands. Her body was frighteningly cold, beneath the torn coat wrapped around her. One wrist showed raw red marks where rope had rubbed skin open. Nathan's jaw hardened. He slid an arm beneath her shoulders carefully. She was light, too light. The kind of lightness that came after days without proper food. The woman stirred faintly against him, barely conscious. A weak breath touched his neck before the wind swallowed it. Nathan pulled off one glove and pressed 2 fingers against her throat. Pulse, weak, but there. "Stay with me," he said sharply. though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to her or himself. The walk back nearly broke him. Twice, the wind shoved them sideways, hard enough that Nathan thought they would both go over the ridge. Snow buried his boots deeper with every step. By the time the cabin finally appeared through the storm, his arms had gone numb from holding her close beneath his coat. He hit the porch hard with one shoulder and forced the door open. Warmth rushed over them. Nathan kicked the door shut behind him and lowered her carefully onto the rug beside the fire. The cabin suddenly felt too small, too quiet, too intimate. He stripped off his gloves quickly and fed more logs into the stove. Flames jumped higher, painting the room gold and red. The woman didn't move. Her dress was soaked through with melted snow and frozen stiff around her body. Nathan stared at her for a long moment. His throat worked once. Then he looked away fast. "Lord, forgive me," he muttered. His hands shook as he reached for the blanket hanging near the chair. He had touched no woman since Clara died. Not once. Not in 10 years. But the cold was already settling deeper into the stranger's skin. He knew what came next if he waited too long. Death always arrived quiet in winter. Nathan knelt beside her slowly and began loosening the frozen buttons of her coat. His rough fingers fumbled against the stiff fabric. Ice had locked parts of the dress solid. He kept his eyes turned away as much as he could. Outside, the storm hammered the cabin roof. Inside, only the fire crackled. By the time he wrapped her in wool blankets, sweat had gathered cold along the back of his neck, despite the freezing air still trapped in the room. But her shivering wouldn't stop. Nathan sat back on his heels, staring at the flames. Then he cursed softly under his breath. There was only one way left. A few minutes later, he lay beside her near the fire, fully clothed except for his coat, pulling the blankets tightly around both of them. The heat of his body slowly began reaching hers. At first, she stayed rigid with cold. Then, little by little, she moved closer without waking. One trembling hand gathered weakly in the fabric of his shirt near his chest. Nathan froze. The smell of smoke and snow clung to her damp hair. He stared into the fire for what felt like hours. His heartbeat wouldn't settle. "You're just keeping her alive," he said quietly into the darkness. "That's all this is." But his voice sounded unsteady even to himself. Sometime deep into the night, the fever came. Her breathing turned uneven. Small sounds slipped from her throat now and then. Nathan kept changing cool cloths across her forehead while the storm raged outside. Near dawn, she suddenly grabbed his shirt with surprising strength. "Please," she whispered weakly. Nathan leaned closer without thinking. Her eyes never opened. "Please, don't leave me outside again." The words barely reached him, but they hit harder than the storm ever could. Nathan went completely still. Her fingers clung to him like she feared waking alone. And for the first time in years, the cabin no longer felt empty. That frightened him more than anything. By morning, the storm had weakened some. Gray light pushed through the frosted windows. Nathan sat alone at the table drinking burnt coffee from a tin cup while the woman slept near the fire beneath 2 blankets. The room smelled faintly of wet wool and pine smoke. Nathan rubbed a tired hand over his face. Then his eyes caught something near the floor beside her torn coat, a small silver object. He bent and picked it up slowly, a ranch badge. Stamped clean beneath the soot and scratches were the words, "Pierce Valley Ranch, Colorado Territory." Nathan's expression darkened. A folded photograph slipped loose beside it. One corner had burned black. He turned it over carefully. A younger Savannah stood beside a large stable house, eyes wary even then. And beside her stood a tall man Nathan recognized immediately, Harland Pierce. Nathan stared at the picture while the fire popped softly behind him. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward the sleeping woman across the room. Outside, snow drifted quietly off the roof. But deep in his chest, something uneasy had already begun to move. Nathan slipped the photograph back into the envelope and stared into his coffee a long moment before folding the ranch badge into his palm. The silver felt cold even near the stove. Behind him, the bed springs creaked softly. He turned. Savannah had pushed herself halfway upright beneath the blankets. Her face looked less pale than the night before, though fever still lingered in her eyes. Loose curls rested against the wool blanket pulled beneath her chin. For a second, neither spoke. Nathan stood first and carried the coffee pot away from the fire. "You shouldn't sit up yet," he said. His voice came rough from lack of sleep. Savannah glanced around the cabin slowly, like someone waking inside a place she didn't trust yet. Her eyes paused on the rifle near the door, the saddle soap on the shelf, the cast iron skillet hanging above the stove. Then they settled on him. "You brought me here," Nathan nodded once. "The storm would have killed you." She lowered her eyes briefly, fingers tightening against the blanket. "Thank you." The words came quiet, careful. Nathan poured hot water into a chipped basin near the stove and kept his back turned while she adjusted the blanket around herself. He heard the soft rustle of fabric, the small catch in her breathing when pain moved through her leg. "You got hurt?" he asked. "Twisted it climbing down the ridge." "From what?" She hesitated. "From men I didn't want following me." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, though he said nothing more. The cabin settled into silence again. Fire popping low, wind brushing snow against the windows. By noon, Savannah insisted on standing. Nathan came in from the barn carrying split wood under one arm and found her near the table. One hand braced hard against the chair while she tried to sweep ashes from the hearth. "You oughta be in bed. I've rested enough. You can barely stand." She kept sweeping anyway. Nathan watched her a moment. The stubborn set of her shoulders. The effort it took just to stay upright. Then quietly, without a word, he crossed the room and took the broom from her hand. Savannah stiffened instantly. Something flashed through her face too quick to fully hide. Fear maybe, or old instinct, Nathan noticed. He stepped back at once and leaned the broom beside the wall instead. "I wasn't taking it from you," he said quietly. "Just didn't want you falling into the fire." The tension in her shoulders eased little by little. "I'm not used to sitting around while someone works for me," she said. Nathan gave a dry shrug. "Then we've got something in common." That earned the smallest hint of a smile from her. It vanished fast, but Nathan caught it anyway. Over the next few days, the mountains stayed buried under snow. Mornings came blue and bitter cold. Frost gathered thick along the inside corners of the windows before sunrise. Nathan rose before daylight each morning to break ice from the water trough, while Savannah slowly found her place inside the cabin. She moved carefully because of her ankle, but she moved constantly. Nathan came back from feeding horses one morning to find bacon grease warming in the skillet and biscuits rising unevenly near the stove. The biscuits were burnt on one side. Savannah looked almost apologetic, setting them onto his plate. "I haven't cooked on a stove this small in years." Nathan bit into one silently. Too much salt. Burned edges, still warm. He ate every piece. Savannah noticed that too. Another evening he returned from the barn after dark and found the torn sleeve of his winter coat folded neatly beside the lamp, freshly stitched. Nathan picked it up slowly. "You fixed this." Savannah looked up from where she sat darning socks beside the fire. It was coming apart under the arm. Nathan ran his thumb over the careful stitching. His late wife used to sew by that same fire. The memory hit hard enough he nearly set the coat down. Instead, he only muttered, "Thank you." Savannah nodded and returned to her sewing. No questions. No pushing. That somehow made it worse. One afternoon, the storm finally cleared enough for Nathan to move the cattle farther down the ridge before another freeze rolled in. Savannah insisted on helping despite her ankle, still wrapped tight beneath her boot. "You don't know these trails," Nathan warned. "I know horses." Nathan looked doubtful but handed her the reins to the calmer mare anyway. The sky hung pale silver above the mountains. Snow creaked beneath the horses as they crossed the lower pasture. For a while things felt almost peaceful. Then one steer broke suddenly from the herd. Savannah turned too fast, trying to cut it off. Her mare slipped hard on hidden ice. Nathan heard the cry before he saw her fall. He kicked his horse forward instantly. By the time he reached her, she was half buried in snow. Breath knocked from her lungs. "Savannah!" His gloves hit the ground as he dropped beside her. She blinked up at him, stunned more than hurt. Nathan grabbed her shoulders too hard, checking for injury. "Where does it hurt? Tell me." "I'm all right," she managed. But Nathan's hands stayed locked around her, his breathing roughened visibly in the cold air. For one strange suspended moment, neither moved. Snow drifted softly around them, horses snorted nearby. Nathan's face hovered inches from hers beneath the gray Wyoming sky. Savannah could see panic still lingering in his eyes. Not annoyance, not anger, fear, real fear. Nathan realized how tightly he held her and abruptly let go. He stood fast and turned away, running a hand over the back of his neck. "We're heading back," he muttered. The ride home passed mostly in silence. That night the barn smelled of hay, leather, and horse sweat, warming against the cold. Nathan stood near the workbench, repairing a broken buckle beneath lantern light, while Savannah brushed down the bay mare nearby. "You hover every time I take 2 steps now," she said softly. Nathan kept working. "You almost cracked your head open today." "But I didn't." The buckle snapped sharply beneath his pliers. Silence stretched. Finally, Nathan set the leather strap down. "I spent 10 years making sure nothing in that cabin could hurt me again," he said quietly, without looking at her. "Then you showed up half frozen in a snowstorm." Savannah's brushing slowed. Nathan laughed once under his breath, no humor in it. "I can't stay away from you," he admitted softly. "And that's exactly why you need to leave before winter ends." The lantern flame flickered between them. Savannah looked at him for a long moment, but Nathan still wouldn't meet her eyes. At last she only nodded faintly. Nathan grabbed his coat and walked out into the cold before she could answer. The barn door shut behind him. Savannah stood alone beside the mare, listening to the wind move softly outside now that the storm had passed. Then her eyes dropped to the wool scarf Nathan had forgotten on the workbench. She stepped closer slowly, and after a moment she picked it up with both hands and held it carefully against her chest. The scarf still carried Nathan's warmth. Savannah closed her eyes for one brief second before folding it neatly and placing it beside the lantern. Outside, the horses shifted in the cold. Inside, the cabin felt quieter than before. Not empty anymore, just careful. Nathan stayed out in the snow longer than he needed to that night. By the time he finally returned, frost clung silver along his beard and shoulders. He stomped snow from his boots near the door without looking toward her. Savannah sat near the fire, mending one of his work gloves beneath the low yellow lantern light. Nathan noticed immediately. "You don't have to do that." "You keep tearing the same thumb seam," she said softly. "Figured somebody ought to fix it proper." Nathan removed his hat slowly. For a second, he simply watched her sitting there in his cabin, like she had always belonged beside that fire. That thought unsettled him enough. He turned away toward the stove. 3 mornings later, they rode down to Black Creek. Nathan needed coffee, lamp oil, horse feed, and medicine for Savannah's ankle before the next freeze rolled in. The trail down the mountain cut through deep pine and narrow bends crusted with old snow. Ice cracked softly beneath the horses' hooves. Savannah rode quieter than usual. The closer they got to town, the straighter Nathan sat in the saddle. Black Creek came into view near midday. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Wagons lined the muddy main street. Men stood outside the feed store, warming hands around tin cups of coffee, while snowmelt dripped steadily from roof edges. Conversation slowed the moment people noticed Nathan. It slowed even more when they saw Savannah riding beside him. Nathan ignored the looks and tied the horses near Mercer's general store. Savannah felt them anyway. Eyes followed her across the street, curious, suspicious. Some simply surprised to see Nathan Cole beside anybody at all. Inside the store smelled of tobacco, flour sacks, and cold wool coats drying near the stove. Edith Monroe looked up first from beside the counter. The older widow's lined face softened with visible surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," she muttered. "Thought I'd die before seeing Nathan Cole walk into town with company." Nathan grunted under his breath while gathering coffee tins from the shelf. Edith stepped towards Savannah, with calmer manners than the others staring nearby. "I'm Edith Monroe," Savannah offered a small nod. "Savannah Reed." Edith's sharp eyes flicked between them once, then toward Nathan. "He letting you stay up there on the mountain?" Nathan answered before Savannah could. "She got caught in the storm." Edith's brows lifted slightly. Nathan rarely explained himself to anybody. "That's so," Edith said quietly. While Nathan spoke with the storekeeper about feed prices, Savannah wandered slowly toward the front window, where notices and handbills covered the wall beside the sheriff's office across the street. Her eyes froze instantly. A wanted poster. The sketch wasn't perfect, but it was close enough. Female runaway from Pierce Valley Ranch. Suspected theft. Reward offered for return. Savannah's breath caught hard. The paper trembled slightly beneath her fingers. Nathan noticed the change in her face from across the room. He crossed toward her fast. "What is it?" Savannah stepped aside silently. Nathan read the poster once, then again slower. His jaw hardened like stone. Behind them, somebody near the stove muttered quietly, "Looks a whole lot like her." Another voice answered lower. "Pierce Ranch out of Colorado's got money behind it." Savannah took a step back. Nathan ripped the poster clean off the wall. The store went silent. "You can't just—" The clerk started. Nathan folded the paper once. "She rides back with me." Nobody argued after the look he gave them. Outside, the air felt sharper. Savannah stood beside the horses, while Nathan loaded feed sacks into the sled. She kept her eyes lowered toward the snow-packed street. "You should left me up there," she said quietly. Nathan tied down another sack harder than necessary. "No, you don't understand what kind of man Harland Pierce is." Nathan finally looked at her then. "Then tell me." Savannah swallowed once. Wind moved loose strands of hair across her face. "He owned the ranch where I worked. After his wife died," her voice faltered briefly, "he decided I belonged there too. Not as staff." Nathan went completely still. "He locked my room at night," she continued quietly. "Kept saying eventually I'd stop fighting him if I ran out of places to go." Nathan's gloved hand tightened around the wagon rail. "So I left," Savannah finished. "Took nothing but my clothes and that photograph. He told people I stole from him because men like him don't like hearing no." Across the street, the sheriff's office door creaked open. Sheriff Wade Griffin stepped out pulling on his coat. Tall man, graying mustache, tired eyes. He crossed slowly toward them. "Nathan." Nathan gave a short nod. Wade looked toward Savannah carefully before lowering his voice. "Pierce has money enough to buy this whole town twice," he said. "If bounty men show up carrying legal papers, there ain't much I can do." Nathan stared at him. "Didn't ask you to do anything." Wade sighed heavily. "That's what worries me." The ride back up the mountain passed mostly in silence. Snow started falling again by dusk. Back inside the cabin, Savannah removed her gloves near the stove with slow, stiff fingers. "You should let me go before this gets worse," she said softly. Nathan poured whiskey into a tin cup without answering. "You could tell them you found me and I ran." Still silence. Savannah looked toward him. "I mean it." Nathan slammed the cup onto the table so hard amber liquid splashed across the wood. "You think I dragged you out of that storm just to watch you disappear?" The words cracked through the cabin, sharp enough to shake them both. Savannah stared at him. Nathan stood breathing hard beside the table, eyes dark with something deeper than anger. The fire snapped loudly between them. "You don't get to decide what happens to me," he said, rougher now. "Not after walking into my life like this." Savannah's heartbeat stumbled. Neither moved. They stood close enough now to feel each other's breath in the warm, firelit room. Nathan's eyes dropped once toward her mouth before he caught himself, and that frightened him. He turned sharply away, grabbed his coat from the peg, and disappeared back out into the storm without another word. Savannah remained standing beside the fire long after the door slammed shut. Outside, wind swept through the dark pines. Far below the mountain, 3 riders entered Black Creek beneath the falling snow, and one of them carried Harland Pierce's silver watch chain hanging from his vest. The man riding at the center sat tall beneath a black wool coat, dusted white along the shoulders. Even from the saloon porch, folks recognized money when they saw it. Fine leather gloves, polished boots, a silver-handled revolver resting easy at his hip. Harland Pierce did not look like the kind of man used to hearing no. The 3 horses stopped outside the sheriff's office just after dawn. Sheriff Wade Griffin watched through the window with a tired expression before opening the door. Harland stepped inside carrying folded papers sealed with a county stamp from Colorado Territory. "I'm looking for stolen property," he said calmly. Wade glanced down at the documents, then back up. "You mean the woman?" Harland smiled thinly. "She belongs to my household." Up on the mountain, Savannah was feeding oats into the horse trough when Nathan rode back from checking the north fence line. Snow clung along the brim of his hat. He saw her standing there in the pale winter light beside the barn doors, wrapped in his old brown coat with loose curls escaping her scarf. For one dangerous moment, the sight of her felt too much like peace. Nathan dismounted slowly. "We got company in town," he said. Savannah's hand stopped mid-motion inside the grain sack. "He came himself." Nathan nodded once. Neither spoke after that. The mountain suddenly felt smaller than before. By afternoon, the storm rolled back hard over Wind River. Snow hammered the cabin roof, while Nathan checked every window latch twice and loaded extra shells into the rifle near the door. Savannah watched quietly from the table. "You really think he'd come all the way up here?" Nathan slid the rifle into place beside the wall. "Men like Pierce don't spend money chasing something they plan to lose." The words settled heavy between them. That evening, Edith Monroe arrived unexpectedly in a rattling wagon, with 2 crates of canned peaches and fresh bread wrapped in cloth. Nathan frowned, seeing her out in weather like this. "You should have stayed in town." Edith brushed snow from her coat and marched straight inside anyway. "And you should have learned manners 20 years ago," she shot back. Savannah nearly smiled despite herself. Edith's sharp eyes softened when they landed on her. "You holding up all right, honey?" Savannah nodded politely. Edith set the bread down on the counter and lowered her voice. "That Pierce man stirred the whole town ugly. Folks are talking." Nathan shut the door hard against the wind. "They can talk." "Yes. Well, talking turns dangerous fast when rich men start waving legal papers around." Nathan's expression darkened. Edith looked at him carefully then. "You can't keep hiding forever, Nathan." The old widow left before dark, but her words lingered behind after the wagon disappeared beneath the falling snow. The next morning, Nathan rode into Black Creek alone. Savannah stood on the porch, watching him disappear down the white trail between the pines until horse and rider vanished completely into the storm haze. Her stomach stayed tight all day. By noon, she could no longer sit still. She swept floors already clean, folded blankets twice, reheated coffee she never drank. Then, sometime near dusk, she heard horses outside, more than one. Savannah stepped toward the window carefully. 3 riders stood in the yard. Harland Pierce sat mounted at the center. Nathan stood several feet ahead of the porch steps beside his horse, one gloved hand resting near his holster. Snow blew sideways across all four men. Savannah's pulse stumbled. Harlan's eyes found her immediately through the window. There it is again, that same look. Ownership. You've caused me a great deal of inconvenience, Savannah. Harlan called calmly enough for the whole yard to hear. Nathan moved slightly, blocking part of the doorway. She ain't going anywhere. Harlan chuckled softly. You mountain men always get sentimental over strays. Savannah felt heat rise into her face. Nathan didn't move. Harlan slowly removed the folded papers from inside his coat. Legal documents, he said, signed and witnessed. She stole from my ranch and fled across state lines. Nathan's eyes never left him. You got proof. I got enough. One of the hired men smirked from horseback. Whole town's already talking about the cowboy hiding another man's woman. The words barely left his mouth before Nathan's revolver cleared leather. Fast, cold, the gun pointed straight at the rider's chest. Everything froze. Even the horses shifted nervously. Nathan's voice came low and deadly calm. She's not property, and anybody says otherwise answers to me. Savannah stopped breathing. She had never seen him like this before. Not quiet, not distant, not hiding. The hired man slowly raised both hands away from his gun belt. Harlan studied Nathan a long moment, and for the first time his confidence cracked slightly around the edges. Then another voice spoke behind them. That's enough. Edith Monroe stepped out from the crowd gathering near the road. Snow covered her shoulders. Her face looked older somehow in the gray light. She stared directly at Nathan. You spent 10 years punishing yourself for something that was never your fault. Nathan's expression shifted instantly. Barely, but Savannah saw it. Edith stepped closer. Clara went back into that burning barn because the mare was foaling, she said quietly. You didn't send her there. You didn't kill her. Nathan's hand lowered an inch. Snow drifted silently around him. You hear me? Edith pressed. She made her own choice. Something inside Nathan finally broke loose behind his eyes. Savannah saw it happen, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a tired man suddenly carrying less weight than he had the day before. Harlan looked irritated now, sensing the moment slipping away. This isn't over, he snapped. I'll return with county authority if I must. Nathan holstered the revolver slowly without taking his eyes off him. Then next time, he said quietly, bring enough men. Harlan yanked hard on the reins and wheeled his horse around. The other riders followed close behind, disappearing into the blowing snow toward town. The yard slowly emptied after that. Folks drifted away in silence. Only Edith remained a moment longer beside the porch. She touched Nathan's arm once. Clara loved you, she said softly. Don't waste another 10 years proving your grief. Then she climbed into her wagon and left. Darkness settled early over the mountain. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and golden. Nathan sat alone near the stove for a long time, elbows resting on his knees, staring at nothing. Savannah moved quietly around the room before finally stopping beside him. You really believed her death was your fault all these years? Nathan gave a faint nod. She asked me to stay home that night. His voice sounded scraped raw. I rode into town anyway for supplies. Fire started while I was gone. Savannah lowered herself carefully into the chair across from him. You loved her. Nathan laughed once without humor. Enough to bury myself with her. Silence settled between them. Outside, the wind softened. Nathan finally lifted his eyes toward Savannah. I stayed away from every living soul because I thought loving someone meant losing them. The confession hung there quietly in the firelight. Savannah looked at him a long moment. Then she stood. Nathan barely had time to rise halfway before she stepped close, placed both hands against his face, and kissed him. Soft at first, careful, like she feared he might disappear. Nathan froze completely. Then slowly, almost painfully, his hands settled against her waist. The fire cracked softly behind them, while snow drifted against the windows. And for the first time in 10 winters, Nathan Cole kissed someone like a man who still belonged among the living. When they finally pulled apart, neither spoke right away. Savannah's hand still rested lightly against his coat. Nathan kept one arm around her waist, as though he feared she might vanish if he let go too soon. Outside, the wind had nearly died. Only the stove ticked softly in the corner while melting snow dripped from the roof. Nathan lowered his forehead briefly against hers and let out a slow breath. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he admitted quietly. Savannah's eyes softened. "You don't have to know everything tonight." A faint smile touched Nathan's mouth then. Small, uneven, but real. The next morning the mountain looked different somehow. Not warmer exactly, just quieter. Sunlight spilled pale gold across the snowfields above the ridge, while smoke curled steady from the cabin chimney. Savannah stood near the stove, wearing one of Nathan's flannel shirts beneath her shawl, kneading biscuit dough against the counter. Nathan came in, carrying chopped wood, and stopped in the doorway. For a moment he simply watched her. The sleeves hung too large around her wrists. Loose curls had escaped her braid again. Flour dusted one cheek. Home. The thought startled him all over again. Savannah glanced up and caught him staring. "You planning to stand there all morning?" Nathan cleared his throat and stacked the wood beside the stove. "Biscuits burning." "They're not burning." Smoke drifted faintly from the pan. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Savannah laughed softly under her breath, for the first time since he'd known her. The sound settled deep somewhere inside him. 3 weeks later, winter finally began loosening its grip over Wind River. Snowmelt dripped steadily from fence rails by midday. Mud returned to the roads through Black Creek. Folks started talking about spring cattle drives again. Nathan rode into town with Savannah beside him in the wagon. This time fewer people stared. Some still whispered. Old habits died slow in small towns. But others tipped their hats toward Nathan now. A few nodded politely at Savannah. Edith Monroe noticed it too. "Told you grief wasn't meant to be lived in forever," she muttered, while handing Savannah a folded piece of blue fabric across the counter at the dry goods store. Savannah touched the cloth carefully. "You don't have to give me this," Edith snorted. "Course, I don't. I want to." Nathan stood near the door, pretending not to listen, while warming his hands around a tin cup of coffee. Across the street, Sheriff Wade Griffin stepped out of his office, carrying a weathered ledger tucked beneath one arm. His expression looked grim. "Nathan," he called. The warmth drained from the morning almost instantly. Inside the sheriff's office, Wade closed the door before speaking. "I got something you both need to see." He laid the ledger carefully across the desk. Old accounting records, names, dates, payments. Savannah's face slowly lost color as Wade flipped through the pages. Women transported between ranch properties. Wages withheld. Debs invented. Signatures forced. Harland Pierce's name appeared over and over again. Nathan's jaw tightened harder with every page. Wade removed his glasses slowly. "Former bookkeeper mailed this before dying in Cheyenne last fall," he said quietly. "Never knew what ranch it belonged to till Pierce showed up here, waving papers around." Savannah stared down at the inked pages silently. All those years she had believed nobody would ever believe her word against Harlan's. Now proof sat right there beneath her fingertips. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Wade leaned back heavily in his chair. Judge and Casper's already reviewing it. He glanced toward Nathan. "Pierce ain't likely sticking around Wyoming much longer." Turns out he didn't. By the following week, word spread that Harland Pierce had left Colorado Territory altogether, after state investigators started asking questions about missing payroll accounts and illegal labor contracts. Some folks in Black Creek pretended they'd never trusted him. Others simply stopped talking about Savannah at all. Life moved on the way it always did out west, quietly. By late spring, the snow had mostly vanished from the lower valley. Grass returned green across the pasture near Nathan's barn. Fence repairs replaced storm preparation. Mornings smelled of thawed earth instead of smoke and ice. Nathan built a new window along the south wall of the cabin, so more sunlight reached the kitchen table, where Savannah sewed during the afternoons. He also built something else, a cradle. Savannah found it half-finished in the barn one evening, beside Nathan's workbench. He looked almost embarrassed standing over it. "Wood warped a little," he muttered. Savannah ran her fingers gently across the smooth pine rail. "It's beautiful." Nathan swallowed once and looked away. That summer Black Creek slowly became kinder. Women who once crossed the street to avoid Savannah now stopped by her small sewing table beside Edith's store with torn jackets and worn dresses needing repair. Nathan would sometimes sit outside the storefront, waiting in the wagon while Savannah worked inside, beneath the open window. He liked hearing her laugh with the others, even if he never admitted it aloud. One warm evening near sunset, Savannah stood barefoot on the cabin porch, watching orange light settle over the mountains. Nathan stepped outside behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She smiled, accepting one. The baby inside her had only just begun to show. Nathan still looked stunned every time his eyes drifted toward her stomach. Savannah reached gently for his hand and rested it there. Nathan went perfectly still. Then slowly his eyes closed. The mountain wind moved softly through the pine trees around them. "I spent years thinking God took everything from me," he said quietly. Savannah leaned against his shoulder. "And now?" Nathan looked down at her. Now there was no fear in his eyes anymore, only wonder. "Now I think maybe he was just waiting for me to come back to life." The following winter, snow covered Wind River once more. But the cabin no longer sounded empty. There were new things now. A baby crying near dawn. Savannah humming softly beside the stove. Nathan walking creaky floorboards at midnight with a tiny bundled child against his chest, while trying very hard not to wake her mother. Some nights he stood near the frosted window, holding his daughter, while firelight warmed the room behind him. And every single time, Savannah would look over at him the same way. Like she still couldn't quite believe he was real. Nathan understood the feeling, because sometimes he still couldn't either. One stormy evening, almost a year after the night he found her in the snow, Savannah stepped onto the porch beside him, beneath a sky thick with falling white. Nathan wrapped one arm around her automatically. They stood there together, watching snow bury the old wagon tracks leading down the mountain. Neither hurried back inside. At last, Savannah rested her head against his shoulder. "The storm nearly killed us," she whispered. Nathan kissed the top of her hair gently. "No," he said softly. "It brought you home." And somewhere beyond the mountains, winter kept moving west across the Wyoming dark, while the little cabin below the ridge glowed warm against the snow. Maybe that's what stays with a person after a story like this. Not the storm, not the fear, not even the long, lonely years Nathan buried himself inside those mountains. Maybe it's the thought that a heart can still come back to life after believing it's too broken to beat for anyone again. And if you've ever sat alone in a quiet room, carrying grief nobody else could see, then maybe you understand him a little more than you expected to. Because sometimes healing doesn't arrive all at once. Sometimes it comes slowly, in the sound of another cup being poured at breakfast, in footsteps beside yours after years of silence, in somebody reaching for your hand without asking you to become someone different first. Savannah didn't save Nathan by forcing him to forget the past. She saved him by giving him a reason to keep living beside it. And Nathan gave her something just as rare, a place where she no longer had to run. If this story stayed with you tonight, let me know where in the world you were listening from. And what part of Nathan and Savannah's journey touched you most? And if stories about second chances, quiet love, old wounds, and finding home in unexpected places mean something to you. There are still more trails ahead and more fires glowing in the dark waiting for us in the next story.